All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and today we are talking about the first season of the hit Apple TV show Severance. And
Just the first season.
Just the first season, so if you are not following the second season, don't worry, we will be spoiler-free, because as you know on the pod, we care a lot about spoilers. And
to be honest, I'm surprised we're still doing this. I figured we'd be covering the end of the world that took place in Dallas, Texas, just yesterday.
Oh man, yeah,
a paradigm-shifting moment with Luka Doncic.
Yeah, the Slovenian assassin is on the move to. I don't think that's not his actual nickname. Oh,
no. I'm in LA right now and was at a bar
when it happened.
I'm sure everyone who likes basketball had the same experience of like staring at my phone, like unable to sort of process.
Yeah,
it felt like an apocalyptic moment. It was like I couldn't process what was taking place, and so I like showed it to my friend who I was with, who's a huge basketball fan, and it's just like you can see on his face kind of this like
glazed over look,
and everyone
non-comprehension.
This brief like zombification of everyone as they like stare at.
Well, everyone was accusing Shams of being hacked. He got hacked. There's no way this is real. I thought that might be true for the first minute or two. And then I saw it reposted on the ESPN proper feed. And I was like, oh,
right.
It's real.
As people started looking at their phones in the bar, and you could see like, it was a great example of like the power of this stuff, right? Like everybody starts to move to the phone. Everyone's doing like a verification. Everyone is asking each other if it's real, right? Everyone's in the bar. Strangers. I was talking to two guys I never met before who were watching when it finally went to ESPN and was like introduced as reality. And the three of us were still just like staring at it like, how is this possible? And then it was just, in the bar, just like very excited because once again, the Lakers have been gifted a superstar in his prime for nothing. So,
well, not nothing, but almost nothing. I mean,
yeah, nothing's the wrong word. It's more like a very good player, but
who's
like,
old and injury prone.
It was gifted by a completely insane decision
and out of the blue.
A better way to put it. Obviously, not nothing. Davis is an incredible basketball player. I mean, more like gifted thanks to the sheer incompetence of another organization.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like Shaq, Orlando being unable to keep Shaq. All that stuff.
Yeah. Charlotte trading Kobe for.
Vladdy?
Yeah.
Now we're getting too far.
We're getting too down into the rabbit hole. All right, this is not a basketball podcast, at least not yet. And but there's been some other exciting news this week. I feel like last week we did our Trump recap episode first week. By the time it came out, stuff we had talked about on Tuesday morning had already been resolved and or escalated to the next level.
That's going to be the theme of it, right?
Yeah, it's just one of the difficulties with covering the Trump administration is the churn of chaos, right? That as soon as you put down a podcast about one thing, a day later, 4 other things have popped up. It's like a hydra of madness.
It really is in keeping. It's in keeping with what we actually talked about on the podcast, right? It's like the microcosm is like you can't even really put down a thought as a person. Without things just radically moving on, changing, new information, escalation. It's very similar to like the struggle of covering it, I'm sure, in the media, and definitely the hapless resistance that seems to be going on. But I think what we're going to try to do is still do it from time to time, but also try to look at a few things a little more thematically than like this thing happened yesterday. Let's talk about it.
Right. We're not like a pure news show where we have a focus that is specific. But that said, as apocalypse, end of the world adjacent news does pop up, as it seemingly will practically every week.
And we've been talking for a while about moving into guests. I think we
have our first guest scheduled for next week, hopefully, if all goes well.
Yeah, and I think that we could eventually get a guest from our enemies to the north.
Yeah, well, We already have you as our Canadian American sleeper agent, Canadian American
collaborator,
Canadian American British sleeper agent. So if we get a trade war going with the UK, also, I mean,
yeah, we will. I'm sure
it's in the cards. But yeah, I'm excited to cover these things as they come up, as seems appropriate. But I did want to look back at a story that broke this week from the esteemed Seymour Hersh.
What's your take on Hersh?
Well, look, I mean, he's obviously one of the most important and impactful investigative journalists ever, right? From Pentagon Papers, the 70s. I mean, he's made a lot of big break. You know, he's broken a lot of big news, made a lot of scoops, etc. He's quite old at this point. In general, I trust him, but he has been proven wrong. The examples are not jumping. He's been mistaken. Yeah. He's jumped the gun a little bit on some stories, which, you know, happens to the best of us. But this week he dropped a story about, in light of this new CIA chief being confirmed, and the CIA very immediately pivoting to COVID was a lab leak. Like China was doing gain-of-function research on SARS-CoV virus, and someone got infected, and that was what caused the pandemic. Hersh has said that he knows of a source who was a kind of insider in the Wuhan lab, a Chinese person who had studied in the United States, had been turned into an asset by the CIA while they were here. And the story's coming out now because that person is now out of China, is safe from...
and that Hersh was saying he had known for ages, but basically had agreed to not write on it until he could verify the safety of the person in question.
Right, which is journalistic best practice, the asset, as they are. And that this person basically in late 2019 alerted the CDC and the CIA and, you know,
about an accident.
That this had happened and that there was going to be an outbreak, and that China was taking steps to protect the elderly, and that this was brought to the attention of the then President Trump first term, and that he basically didn't want to hear it because he was negotiating a trade deal with China, and essentially did nothing. Right? I mean, and we know this to be the case, right? I mean, we lived through. I'm not sure if I 100% know that what's set out in Hersh's article, and we'll put a link. It's under paywall in his Substack, but I'll put a link to it if anyone's interested in subscribing. You should check it out for yourself. Lots of good stuff on there. But clearly we know that Trump probably knew much more about COVID, regardless of its origins, before anyone else did. And we saw how that was handled, which was...
right. And in the article, I think the crux of it really is that they had a clear opportunity to, at the least, very simply protect the elderly and most vulnerable with the amount of runway that they had. I believe it was in December 19, to make real concrete steps in places like nursing homes. And then, of course, the trickle down was that it was sort of said in the report that if we can limit the early impact among the elderly, it will be much easier to contain it in the across a broader society.
Right, and the death toll
essentially
much
he
lower.
thought, he basically was like, no, the economy will crash, and I can't have, he's the guy who's loves to tweet when the stock market goes up and is like, look what I did to the stock market, right? Remember this thing? And so
yes.
That's basically what the article portrays, is that it's kind of interesting. Like I said to you when we were looking at it, like it has something for everyone in a sense. It's like, it does come out with the, this was in a lab, this was in Wuhan, this is where it started, this was being done for this gain of function research, but it also is like, and this executive could have done a much better job, and
right, and Trump completely screwed it up. Yeah,
and all the people who knew were just like, this isn't being declassified.
They were too afraid of Trump, essentially, to step out of line. Which, given what we've seen the last couple of weeks, makes sense.
It's interesting, right? Because you can make a pretty good claim that, like, as far as illnesses go, it's a pretty good one if it was direct and planned biological warfare. Now, of course, it doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't even really imply that. It implies that.
No, it doesn't imply it at all. It says it was an accident.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that, like, if they do say in the piece that, you know, there are these institutions both in the US and in China that are doing research for, you know, biological warfare. And it's fascinating because, you know, if you look at the end product of what the disease, the virus did to this country, right? In terms of breaking, you know, not only the tragedy.
In other words, if it had been deliberate, it couldn't have gone much better, is what you're saying.
It's just right. Like, not saying that the asset is lying and actually it wasn't an accident and what he gave to them was an accident, or that it wasn't an accident and they didn't want to say that China did it on purpose because that might start some huge escalation. Whatever. My point is just that, like, if these things are being developed, even just as research into biological warfare, not with the explicit aim of being a biological warfare, if an adversary was wanting to choose a way to do it, this is pretty solid.
Yeah.
You know, looked up in the lab. Oh, geez, here we go. Up, and sort of trusting that the people in charge at the current moment, Trump, etc., would react exactly how they did.
Would fumble the punt, so to speak.
That's right. And so all of the damage that they could do.
And of course, you know, if we're talking about like lab leaks and gain of function research, and I mean, we need only to look back to the fall of 2001 and the aftermath of 9/11 and the anthrax attacks in this country, which very quickly they realized, oh, this anthrax is the exact one we've been doing work on in Fort Detrick for years, or what have you, right? And we'll cover that case in another time because that, I think, is certainly worthy of an episode. But yeah, I mean, it's not.
It certainly doesn't bode well for.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not that comforting to have this story dropping just as Trump is in the process of once again imposing his will, however pell-mell it may be, on all the areas of the American government's function.
Right. And to say nothing of, like, obviously we've talked about this in the past, but that there doesn't appear to be the political will to do something like a lockdown again, to do something like a distribution of wealth again. It doesn't seem like any of that is actually remotely possible. So I don't even think he has to, like, ignore it in the same way.
Well, I think it'll be possible that if a illness that's significantly worse than COVID hits, I mean, that
maybe if it's significantly
worse,
worse,
snap people out of their malaise. But yeah,
right. People are already going to be paying more money for cereal and tequila and maple syrup. Yeah,
I heard the average car is going up in cost by $3,000. Yeah, like
cars cross the border like 5 different occasions while being built.
Yeah, that's like, because GM and other major car manufacturers since the 19-teens have had a very profitable Toronto, Ontario region. You know, yeah, and
well, maybe Hersh will get on the trade war next time, and we'll have some more for you next week.
Yeah, we'll keep our ears to the ground. But let's talk about Severance. Great show. I really like it. I don't have many critiques of it. You know,
well, when did you watch it?
I watched it as it was dropping. I'm a devoted Apple TV Plus subscriber, which I think
you were before, huh?
Yeah, I was by that point. I think I got a new computer in December 2021, and it came with a three months trial, so I was already on there.
I find that I get free trials of Apple thrown at me all the time.
Well, whenever you get a new Apple device.
Well, and like Lyft has offered me.
Oh, yeah.
There have been a few different times where I'll just jump on it. We actually watched it at a friend's place that did have Apple. We were dog sitting, and we didn't have Apple TV at the time. Mm-hmm. And so we, my fiance started the first episode and was like, this is great. And then insisted on just watching the entire thing.
Yeah.
Over the course, maybe it was 2 days, but it felt like one ceaseless fucking nightmare. And I remember like 4 episodes in, 5 episodes. And I'm also like, this is really good.
Sure.
But I was just like, hey, I think I'm getting sort of really sad.
I'm getting ill.
I think maybe this is not healthy. Like it's making me actually depressed. Can we maybe space this out just a little bit? And season 2, it's like I'm able to watch it the way I want. It is a great show for the the old school, like actually seeing it once a week.
Yep.
You're seeing that phenomenon of people going to Reddit boards, theories emerging. There's a fun communal element that comes along once in a way about a show.
Yeah.
Like there's kind of a flirtation with it with something like White Lotus, but it's not significant enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
To capture.
Well, it's a mystery box show, right? It's going back to Lost and to innumerable other shows that have attempted to string you along each week with a enticing and heightening mystery. I think this show's a little better than Lost, even though I love Lost, unlike many.
Well, it's a very interesting thing in the sense that it is a show and a mystery and also like a sort of thought experiment. And Lost and those other shows, like they're often bigger.
Well,
like,
they have too many episodes. Like Lost had like the first 3 seasons have like 25 episodes.
Right, but also it's like it's this magical expense.
This
the
has
first
like
of this show, they're basically in the office.
Yeah, and this has like a more cinematic quality as well.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Ben Stiller, primarily a film director, handled, I think, half of the directing duties in the first season and is doing the same with this new season. Most people have probably seen it if they're listening, but the basic premise is it's a show about work-life balance in its most extreme form, in that the workers in this office, the 4 main characters, they have this brain chip, this chip inserted in their brain that makes it so that when they enter the office, their memories of their life are removed, but their memories of like facts and how to be a person and on a basic level are maintained. But it's as if they were born anew on entering this like severed floor, as it's called. And it's
sort of like what you might imagine it's like to work for Tesla. Got yourself a Neuralink. You're down there in Austin, maybe they're doing it. Who knows?
Well, that's one thing we'll definitely talk about, right? It part of the reason why would you want to do this? Well, on the one hand, it allows the employer to mistreat the employees however it wants, and their non-work outies, as they're called, will have no knowledge of this. So we see things like characters coming home with like a bandage on their forehead, and their friends will be like, "What happened?" And they'll be like, "Oh, they told me that I tripped and hit myself, hit the corner of a cabinet or whatever." When in fact, like someone hit them in the head with a stapler, and like, which is dystopian. Not that much different though than the current Amazon warehouse worker who can't complain for fear of retaliation. Right.
I mean, that's the thing. Like it's probably a little different in the second season as the mystery starts to pick up speed, but or the unveiling of various things. But the first season, it's weird because it's, on the one hand, it feels relatable. It's this workplace. Most people have some experience or adjacent experience to this type of thing, a small work group, work politics, all of that stuff. But what's interesting is that you don't quite relate to it, and it's not cathartic to watch it. It's not like, at least from my experience, it's sort of instead just this brutal sort of affirmation of so many of our lives. Like, I think that's what was so sad about it. Like, it wasn't quite, there are funny, it's hilarious in many places, but at the end of the day, that first season, I just, again, it's not quite like, oh yeah, I can like relate to what these people are going through. It's just this like painfully distilled version of our reality for so many people.
Yeah, I think that's well said. As far as other reasons why this severance procedure would be necessary, I guess to prevent industrial espionage, because your out of work outie life literally has no idea what you do. So if you're working on sensitive,
not going to go just randomly start talking to Hersh. That's for sure.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. It's a good example, because they're literally unable to even remember what their job is. They have just no idea. They don't know any of the terminology, none of the technology, anything that they work with.
Yeah.
So the company behind this is called Lumen, and it's one of these conglomerates of indeterminate size that seems to have its fingers in just like every single industry imaginable. And we don't really have that clear of a picture. It's a little bit like just sort of, if you ever go down to Arkansas, and you'll notice that everything is owned by Walmart. So there's like
I've done shows there.
Yeah, you know, so you pull into like the Walmart gas station, and then you head over to the Walmart pharmacy, and there's probably like a Walmart butcher shop.
Like the field, I mean, the place Bentonville's, it's a trip, man. Like the soccer fields like perfectly sort of, you know, so green. It's like a Pleasantville type situation.
Walton Family Field or what have you.
Yeah, and then you like the place that we did the show is at this really nice brewery in this culinary study building with all of these different food trucks, all funded and like just basically put there to give these professionals, these mostly young professionals who have to move to Bentonville, Arkansas.
Right, and the Crystal Bridges Museum is like there's Monet's and like it has a little bit of that energy, right? Where you're in
he lives in Lumen housing,
right? And the town itself is called Keir, which is named after Keir Egan, who's the founder of this company. It also a little bit recalls the sort of running gag in 30 Rock of the Steinhardt wig company. How like their network is owned by a company from the 19th century that made wigs and has just like, because we learned that they originally were like a medicinal tonic company, which is like a sham medicine of the 19th century. Think of like Mark Twain, like Huckleberry Finn, right? The King and the Duke.
I thought of like Abe Simpson's like virility tonic.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, this was a huge industry of just cranks selling you, you know, and they'd ride into town with their wagon and, but I mean, a lot of big companies that are still around today, like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, for instance, originated in this era doing something very similar. The famously original formula of Coca-Cola, which had that little drop of cocaine in it. You know, I'm sure when you took that, you thought, wow, my virility, you know. So it began as one thing, but now it's clearly a tech company. It's clearly, you know, a pharmaceutical company. At one point we hear something about that. I mean, and the company has a kind of hagiographic worship of Keir, the founder. He's held up as this kind of godlike, Christ-esque figure, which is he represented in a variety of paintings we see throughout the show. You know, sort of like Keir survived,
handed down in religious fashion.
That's right. Yeah. Which also kind of fits with that like 19th century kind of Great Awakening and the merger of capitalism and evangelical Protestantism, which, you know, Max Weber, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, and
old school company towns.
Yeah,
they're far more brutish than like Bentonville today, right? Scrip.
Oh yeah, company Scrip. We've talked about that several times. There's even a hymn that one of the characters sings, Keir, chosen one, Keir, which is just perfect. It's so creepy and eerie. But companies used to have company songs that you would sing at the company meeting, and this was a part of corporate culture from the 19th century on. And it feels a little bit like a cult, right? I mean, which I'm sure when you're working for someone like Elon Musk, it feels like a cult too, right? You know, because you know if you express an iota of doubt in one of Elon's ideas, you'll immediately be fired.
And I'm sure there's just all kinds of Musk propaganda all over these places, right?
Of course. So we have four main characters. The main character, who's the center of season one, is Mark Scout, who his innie is called Mark S. Seems to be an effort to differentiate people in the innies don't seem to have last names. They seem to have just a last initial. He was an English professor who specialized in the literature of World War I. So Rupert Brooke, Wilfred Owen, sort of these doomed poets of the First World War. Do you ever read The Great War in Modern Memory, the Paul Fussell book?
No, I did not read that.
Yeah, you never had a World War I poetry phase, Michael?
I didn't have a poetry phase. I read a book that I've read a few times and I'm sort of obsessed with is the Margaret Macmillan 1919 Peace Conference book.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, we've talked about that. Yeah, that's
and
great.
yeah, that's
You never read All Quiet on the Western Front?
no, I did not read that.
Oh
No. Is
man,
it good?
I read, and that's all right. I read all
Yeah,
this stuff when I was a teenager, of course. When I was like
as one
14,
does.
I was
Yeah.
really into this.
I was
No,
reading John Grisham when I was 14. I think I was reading The Client or something like that.
well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I was also reading Orson Scott Card and God knows what coded secret Mormon propaganda sci-fi novels. But so Mark S is I just think that's an interesting background note, right? He's obsessed. He quit his job teaching college. He was a college professor, and because
his wife died.
that's right, his wife died in a tragic car accident, and he found he could no longer go on teaching. So they're struggling with grief for an indeterminate amount of time, at least 2 years. We find out in the show he's been working at Lumen, and he underwent this severance procedure. And he says in one point in the show that it was partly because that way he could spend 8 hours of his day not just being mired in grief, right? That he could have a life separate from his outside life, which seems to be horrible.
It also implies this sort of white flag, this inability to process the death in sort of not being able to conceive of not getting over it. One doesn't get over it, but that like the idea of not being consumed by it can't even occur to him, such that this is not a temporary procedure. I mean, you're supposed to keep the chip in, right?
Right. I mean, theoretically, you could leave Lumen and just leave and have the chip, but no longer work for them. But yeah, he also is an alcoholic, right? We see him drinking.
There's no sense that he's gonna like. You don't see the Audi going to therapy and trying to like process what's going on so that he can quit Lumen and have a full unsevered life again.
No, and even when we see him going on dates, for instance, he seems not really able to connect with his romantic interest because the shadow of his dead wife is all too present. He lives in Lumen housing, and next door, his boss from Lumen actually lives next door to him. Her name is Harmony Cobell, but in the outside world, she presents herself as Mrs. Selvig and takes an inordinate interest in him, is constantly finding trivial reasons to strike up conversations. And then we get to see them interacting on the inside in the office. The relationship is completely different. She says contradictory things that in the office she says, my mother was an atheist, but on the outside she says, no, my mother was a Catholic. And so what she's doing by meddling in his outer life so directly is very unclear. Like it seems like a gross violation of Mark, given that he's unaware of their other relationship.
Right, but the way it's also introduced is it's like it's all part of what makes the show, I think, so interesting in the first season, which is that the scale and gravity of the evil or otherwise that Lumen is doing is completely unknown. You are filled in with basically nothing. And so like maybe all the other characters have people living beside them who are tracking them. And we don't know. We just don't know. And
that's a good point. Yeah, we have no idea.
It just hangs it like, especially in the first season, it just this sense of whether it's what do they do for work, what does the company do, all the way through to like what are the actual like reasons these people are really doing this, what are the rights that these people have. None of it is really laid out. And so when you see her for the first time, it's like, oh, maybe that's part of Severance. Like
that's right. We don't know. So the next major character is Helly R, who we learn in the outside is Helena Egan, who's the daughter of the current CEO of the company. Is played by Britt Lauer, is a new recruit, and we get to see her kind of introduction into the world of being severed, which she's incredibly resistant to, much more so we learn than any of the other characters.
Importantly, we don't know about the CEO
We don't find that out until the end of the season.
And so she just seems to be a perfectly normal person who is trying to basically kill herself to end this nightmare, right?
That's right. I mean, she literally threatens to cut her own fingers off if the Audi version of her won't let her
she's trying
quit.
to show the Audi how bad it is, basically.
Yeah, and the Audi, she posts messages to the Audi, and the Audi responds with videos being like, you aren't a person, I'm a person.
And this is one of the things that kind of, again, very, I think, pretty brilliantly puts you in this gray spot where it's like, it's not quite clear what guys like Mark S. were thinking about themselves until Helly came along. Their curiosity of the building outside of their office, seeing her experience seems to affect them. But then, of course, there's Petey, the person who...
Right. Well, Helly is brought in to replace Petey, who was the previous boss and Mark's best office friend. Mm-hmm. And we meet him on the outer world when he approaches Mark and says, hey, I'm Petey. I'm your innie's best friend. You're one of my good friends, which is a funny little thing. And he has undergone a procedure to reintegrate, meaning that he's trying to bring these two severed parts of himself back into alignment. And it's not going well. He seems to be really struggling. He's hallucinating that he's back in the office, that he's in the outside, he's in the bathroom, he's in the office. He's kind of...
And again, like part of the whole picture is we don't know how much of his inability to do this is because it's new technology, if they don't have a good handle on it, if Lumen is sort of repressing things that would make that type of process easier, like all of that.
Or if it's specific to him, is it something about him in particular that's making this go so badly?
That's
right? I mean, we have no idea. Just to go over the other two main characters, there's Irving, who's the oldest member of the group, and when we first meet him is the most compliant. He seems obsessed with rules. He's, we don't learn very much about him aside from the fact that towards the end of the season, we discover his Audi spends an inordinate amount of time making these incredibly specific paintings of this like dark hallway with like an ominous door at the end.
Like when remember what Battlestar Galactica and like all the paintings at Starbucks and the whatever it was, like the blue, yellow.
Was
red.
It like a sign that they were secretly Cylons or whatever?
I think it was like the pointing to Earth or something. I can't remember.
Oh yeah. But it was like some code they were accessing inside themselves. That's right.
But he sort of starts to have his world come crumbling down because he starts a bit of a tryst with Christopher Walken.
Right. It plays a character called Bert who works in a different
John
department.
Turturro and Christopher Walken, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. It's really well done.
I mean, across the board, the acting is just ridiculous.
Yeah, everyone in this is perfect. And that seems to be causing Irving some kind of strife because we have a couple scenes where he's like looking around and it's like dark ooze is kind of leaking in around the corners of his perception, which seems like a bad sign. I don't know. Yeah,
it seems almost like there's a malfunctioning of the chip perhaps, but also like he is the one who, romantically, if unwittingly, sort of starts to expand the horizons of these people.
That's right.
The little cubicle or whatever it is of the foursome, and which includes Dylan. We should just briefly say,
Dylan is played by Zach Cherry, and he's kind of the most overtly comical. Like he's the comedian,
satirical, like a parody of an office worker.
That's right. And I want
my rewards. I can't wait to get my waffle dinner.
Right, he's so into the perks that they get for meeting certain quotas and goals as their department. And he has a highly inflated sense of who he must be on the outside world. Too.
Right, because he's so good at his job and he's always winning the prizes and stuff like that. But, they start to go and, there's all of this animosity and sort of built up walls between departments. There seem to be different myths presented to different departments to sort of keep them at least on edge, if not outright animosity and fear.
Right, and some of the paintings depict like the macro data rebellion, where like one department murdered the other department and stuff like this.
And MDR, which is their department, which is macro data refinement, is all of them are bizarre. Whenever you see any of these departments, they're all vague and it's unclear what's going on. But there's
like our group, they group numbers on a screen and put them in little bins in these old school
but they also
computers.
like we learn that you just emotionally know what numbers to group. It's very bizarre. Well, we can talk about what our theories might be.
Sure, we'll do that at the end. The other one is the one where Bert, Christopher Walken's character, works. Is he like curates the paintings that are like put up around?
Yeah.
And then the third one we see in the first season is a room where a guy is just feeding baby goats.
Mm-hmm.
And no explanation beyond that is given. Yeah. And that's the moment where we get a little bit into a kind of more David Lynchy territory, right? Or a little bit of Lost, right? Where it's just like in Lost, it was like, what is a polar bear doing on a tropical island, right?
It just like radically expands the possibilities of what's going to happen. But also, to just sort of quickly go through the season to talk about it a bit more broadly is that, as they start to go outside, the machine shows itself to not be particularly well oiled. They struggle to keep them down. They struggle to track them down. They are able to go and have conversations. They start to the point where you're like, wait, are they being allowed to be able to wonder a little bit?
Yeah.
They eventually, concoct this scheme that three of them are going to be able to escape outside. Right?
Yeah, and so we should talk about a couple other characters. There's Seth Milchick is sort of Miss Cobell's assistant, played by the brilliant Tremel Tillman.
Kind of the muscle.
But also like he's friendly, but with an edge.
And truly, the acting is also amazing, but he's like the breakout star of this thing.
He's so handsome. It's insane.
Wild. Every scene, he is so good.
The scene when he dances, one of the benefits they get is a dance music experience. And he comes in and starts dancing with all of them. It's really, it's incredible. The other character we meet in the first season is the security, who's the real muscle, this guy Grainer, who none of the overseers are not severed, so they are aware of what's happening on the outside and on the inside. And Grainer, as Mark meets Petey, he starts to sort of investigate how Petey came to be unsevered, and he meets with this this woman who's a scientist who's quit Lumen, called Ragabi, who is the one who did the procedure to unsever Petey. And as Mark is meeting with her, Grainer arrives to presumably kill her or capture her, and instead she kills him. Right? So that isn't really dealt with. The consequences of that aren't really dealt with in the first season, but it seems something sinister is going on.
What ends up the critical pieces that come together at the end, the other characters that we haven't mentioned, is Mark S, sort of the main character, right? Mark Scout, his sister and his sister's husband, who is also just incredible every single time he's on screen.
Michael Chernus plays Rickon Hale.
He's like a self-styled self-help guru. And the Enies get a hold of the book and start to actually like buy this drivel, right? Because they're not exposed to really anything like this. And so they become kind of obsessed with it.
They think his book, Cobell smuggles his book into their office, and they treat this book as like their Bible.
That's right.
They're the Frankenstein monster finding paradise lost in the woods with this thing.
Absolutely.
And there's definitely a Frankenstein subplot to all of this, right?
Why don't you quickly explain how it wraps up, and then we can talk about a couple of the themes.
So basically, something happens where Milchick needs to talk to Dylan's innie when he's at home. So he goes and they activate his chip when he's outside of the office. And this is called the overtime contingency. And so Dylan's innie actually sees his son, realizes that he has, a kid, a life, a bigger life that he had no idea about. And when he returns to the office, he shares this information with the other people. They realize that this can be triggered by going into this office and holding these switches up, essentially. It's designed to be done by more than one person, but Dylan volunteers that when he has a waffle party coming up, when that's over, he'll sneak in and he'll he'll trigger this while the other people are in the outside world, and while they're in the outside world, their innies will emerge, and they'll be able to see what the outside world is like, and tell people
help us
that their life in this place is
right, that they're like, when they act up, they go to break rooms and have to do a sort of like Orwellian,
where they repeat this apology message like sort of 900 like times or something.
5 scenario, right?
Yeah, it's really dystopian, like and
it's really dark. And the wife, Mark's outie wife, as we come to find out,
Miss Casey, she exists. Is still alive in the office
as a different person with no connection to Mark, but is interestingly his therapist, right? Which leads to a lot of the theories that have came out after season 1 about why she would be the therapist, and that perhaps she's being, they're trying to reanimate this person, right?
Is there a real Frankenstein?
I mean, that's part of my theory, is that she's being rebuilt, and
she died, and they're rebuilding her mind.
And in therapy, it's like an AI model, and that's a very good place to learn how to be human, because you're learning the most vulnerable parts. She reads all the cool things about the outie to the innie, sort of to see how they react almost.
That's right.
And so you have all of these elements, and then it all comes to this.
So Mark is at a book party for his brother-in-law Rickon's book. He goes up to Rickon. He says, "Oh, I admire you so much." When throughout the series up to that point, Mark has been completely hostile to Rickon, thinks he's a complete fraud, moron. Suddenly he's like, "You're the most influential person in my life."
Yeah, but Rickon's too narcissistic to not understand that something has changed. It's really just that outie Mark has finally seen the light, basically. At first he's like, "Really?" But not genuinely stunned. "Honey, there's something wrong with Mark."
Yeah. Meanwhile, Irving attempts to find Bert, who has since retired, and he's banging on his door. We see Bert is living with a husband, it seems,
or a boyfriend. Something
we don't know. I mean,
it punctures the romantic idea that was clearly in his head of I should go see Bert,
and the two of us have something special, right?
That's right.
And meanwhile, as we said before, Helly is Helena Egan.
It's amazing.
And she's at a literal board function.
Conference?
Yeah, where they're announcing,
celebrating
the fact that she's the first Egan to get the procedure, and it's kind of like she's showing it's safe. Look, we wouldn't do this to one of our own if it wasn't right. Yeah. And she gives a speech where she announces that it's hell, we're being tortured, and it's the sort of worst.
And this is all sort of happening while, Mark ends up discovering a picture
of him with whom he knows to be Miss Casey, and the last thing he says is she's alive, and then Milchick breaks in. Has this
perfect double meaning. The sister thinks that is Mark talking about his wife is alive. He's talking about Miss Casey, who they've become worried about.
But then also the baby gets kind of kidnapped by Miss Selvig / Hobel, who's at the... Anyway, it's a great cliffhanger to end on.
Yeah. I do think, there's a bunch of... obviously the second season, it starts to turn... And I don't say this like it's bad. The episodes have been great. But it definitely turns into more now we're going to start the mystery of the world a little more than just some of the episodes really felt like an examination of work life and reality, and now we are getting into why were those goats there? Well, what's this bigger room with even more animals? And that's great, that's where we are, but this one is I think there are some pretty key observations with labor that I think are really fascinating.
You've got a bunch of good thoughts on this, Michael. Why don't you
but also just the way that people are watching it and what people like about it and what they, the conversation about it, where it's I think that I said right at the beginning that it's just this weird affirmation of our lives, right? And it's interesting because we're not severed, right?
No.
We don't think, at least from what we can tell, right? We're not severed, but we are, so many people work in ways where they are shielded. Just like the departments are a great sort of microcosmic example, right? They are shielded from the overall functioning of the company, the concern, the business, and even in a bigger sense, the social impacts are then sort of mitigated. And this all feels very...
Not me. I do PR. I'm not the one who's
yes,
polluting the environment.
Right. Like, and so the famous customer service retort when someone gets mad is, well, it's not my fault or it's not me. And there is truth in that.
I'm just following orders.
Yes, it's like, so if someone in a call center who you never, this sensation where you're like, you're being taken advantage of by this bigger entity, you're Lupin, and then there's just this person who is like, it's not me, and like has to sit there and tell you how powerless they are.
Yep.
You are upset and want remediation, but also if you have a heart or a brain or both, you're like, I know it's not you. What can we do? Like and it's hope. I mean, it's like a true distillation of, I think, the show and also sort of like our daily lives. And I think if you drill down a little further on that too, it's like the idea of being shielded from the impact that you have on the world. That, like, never mind the poor sap who is telling you, please, sir, you can't use that type of language. I can't reduce your monthly rate or whatever. Right?
That credit can't be restored, sir. Like,
right. Yeah. Like, it's also that there are all these severances in your life, in a lot of people's work lives, that are meant to like blunt at the least the terrible impact that you are having by doing your job. And that's in many ways, some ways totally not your fault. Like, for example, you get paid very little. You then are in the market for low cost items, right? You are shielded in just because you are work a day, you're trying to get by, from then helping to create a whole market and labor for low cost goods that give everyone else the shitty life that you have. And like, by compartmentalizing all these things, right, which I think is one of the elements of the satire here, it facilitates these greater overarching evils or banalities, right, or meaninglessnesses.
Well, there's like a feedback loop where it's like you're low on your totem pole, but that means there needs to be an even lower person who makes the goods that are still affordable to you at the bottom of your, right? So it's like,
that's right. That's exactly right. And like I said, I actually put here in this note that it's like, I think we've heard a lot about like bullshit jobs. We know that's like the Graeber thing. It's brilliant. It's accurate. So many of us work jobs that do not need to exist, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just clear. But the slightly like one remove from that, and again, this is not to put individual responsibility. It's kind of like blaming individuals for climate change. What I'm saying is that a lot of times the seeming meaninglessness of what you do is actually there to help facilitate the greater plunder and pillage of the world and people that is going on. Where it's like you're kind of just like, what do I get paid like enough to get by doing this completely useless thing? That's weird. I shouldn't think too hard about that because that'll make me sad about my life. But we rarely go, well, wait, why is there a whole setup where I would be given a job to putter around and buy some consumer goods? Oh,
to keep you from picking up the pitchfork, Michael.
or just like funneling my money back up to my boss.
Right.
right. And that, like, to me, it's one of the interesting parts about the show that, like, we talked about this before, but I did want to talk about this just briefly, where it's like, the two things are, would you be severed? The first thing is like, one thing that's really underplayed is that it is still 9 to 5. You don't get those 8 hours as the hours.
You just don't have to experience them.
And those hours, like, that's your life. Like, I'm sorry, but like,
you're effectively shortening your own life by a third.
And reducing it to like getting up and going to bed almost. But like, sure, there's a bit of time.
You have
but
dinner.
Like, it's dinner. Think about after 5 when you're done.
You go to a punk show.
You're like,
you're still tired too, right? I mean,
well, that's the thing. Yeah. That's it. You're still tired. Is your brain tired? So you're not like piercing through that novel with all the energy you saved from not working. You are just like turning on 4 episodes in a row of Seinfeld and eating chicken nuggets and going to bed. Like, this is insane to do this. But also, like, the flip of it, right, which would kind of be like a different approach labor-wise and life-wise, is like, what if you had a fulfilling jobs too? Yeah. Like, these jobs are purposefully not fulfilling in this for both the mystery and the theme and the statement or whatever.
What if you're
But
like a social worker or something,
what
and you're
if you're
doing
just doing good, right? Like that's your day. Now this is a bit fantastical because obviously working with these people, it's so hard to work, for example, in social work. You're always dealing with constraints and not enough resources
That's
and
right.
all that. But let's just say that instead your actual job was shielded from all of that side of it. And your job was to feed people who needed food or clothe people who needed clothes. And people's days were brightened by you and said thank you. And it actually filled you with joy. You could like argue, given, let's be honest, like what most of our lives are actually like from 6 a.m. to 9 and then 5 to 6 a.m. You could argue that like you should reverse it and just get down to the 8 hours and just get
and
rid
then
of
sever
like,
the rest of your life.
hey, what are you doing? You're watching Frasier over and over? Is that what you do? Right? And I would love to see like one character who does have a great job that they love. Like Dylan kind of likes it, but it's not like quite
It's
like
not doing
that.
anything that meaningful, right?
That's right. That's right. And like I think that one of the elements to Mark and getting to see him as an outie a bit, and what I hope it gets to is like so much of it is about the idea of the grief of
The
losing his
loss.
wife.
Yeah.
But it's like his life is the most depressing part of the show.
Oh yeah.
Right? His life. Never mind like
Not his
idea,
job in the office. Like
yes. Yeah. But yeah, so a couple more things. We did want to talk briefly
what if
about,
you could sever your life further?
what if there was a refraction of severances, right? So like I saw one that was the simple one of like if you could sever the bathroom, right? Yep. So like whatever it is you're doing in there,
you go through the door, you don't know, you come back out.
Of course work, right? But I'm thinking like can you get like an on off any outie switch? So like you go out, you have a few too many, you know what's coming. Like like
that you're going to be hungover.
Sure,
it's going to be awful.
Glory, you want the glory. You want the Popeye sandwich while completely smashed. And you want to be just downing it, like drowning it in sauce and just crushing it. But like you'll pass out very quickly and that'll be fine too. But everything
you're going
from
to feel
that moment,
horrible in the morning.
If you can like
switch that little switch.
Yeah, just boom, and just know that like some innie is gonna have to just grind the spins and getting up to get the ibuprofen and like puking, like all the stuff that comes with these.
What if you could sever doing your chores? What if you just are lazy and hate that, but you that you train your innie somehow and you just flip that on, comes out. The house is pristine, right?
Yeah, and I said this to you after the game I watched just the other day, where like you can still retain your identity. Like, you have identity. Sports fandom is a great example. We talked about it a bit at the beginning of the show, but like I am a lifelong Manchester United fan. And for a long time, it was a cakewalk, right? We're just winning everything. I'm always tuning in. We're winning.
We're Champions League final.
Yeah.
Again.
Oh, we came back again and won. Isn't that cool? Oh yeah, that's our thing. Everyone around the world knows that we come back at the end and win. This is fun. And now it's been like a decade of just terrible stuff. Like
just utter mediocrity.
Horrible to watch, like shell of yourself, where you're watching it, you're constantly in this weird nostalgia. You're thinking about when you were younger, the team was better, all that stuff. It's empty, it's soulless, it's like corporatized, it's lost. It's like this thing.
But it's still a big part of your identity. So
it's a huge part of my life. I can't not watch. I definitely have to like.
You have friends, you have relationships that center around this. Yeah.
I have to talk to my dad every week.
Yeah.
He would be crushed if I just didn't know what happened in the Manchester United game. But if my innie could just watch these terrible games, I wouldn't have to I could just keep wearing the jersey, right? Check the scores, get a general idea as an outie of what's going on, and just wait for them to get better again. Yeah.
No, that's great. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's many possibilities. Obviously there's a bunch of mysteries here. What's going on with Petey? What's Lumen doing? What's their end game? And I think we've already kind of suggested this. Clearly, the show's a meditation on the Elon fantasy of implanting chips in people's heads, and it seems to be like a gateway towards the singularity, towards a sort of cybernetic immortality, right? Where your consciousness can be uploaded into a new body, and that process presumably could be repeated ad nauseum.
And one would think that at some point the show is getting to the idea that kind of applies to the Musks of the world, which is that there's Lumen, which probably has all of these different people, innies and outies and otherwise, serving all myriad of functions, all to funnel immortality to this one guy, right?
Yep. Yeah, well,
or a few guys,
right? Well, or that, like, yeah, that their final goal is perhaps the resurrection of their beloved leader Kier, or that maybe he is in fact in, Walt Disney-esque like stasis somewhere, waiting for the technology to catch up. This was a big thing in Westworld, right? This idea of like, can we move a person's consciousness fully into one of our sort of android cyborg bodies, right? It's a preoccupation of sci-fi for a long time, and as we've mentioned, Elon seems to be one of the people. I mean, there's also Kurzweil, right, and the singularity. We've talked about this in a few other episodes. Something that comes up in my work on cybernetics because ultimately, I think it's quite a perversion of the original intention of cybernetics. Cybernetics originally, is tragically tuned. Like, the point of cybernetics is like, we're still gonna die. Like, we're not gonna, like that. Just in the classic, that's what gives life meaning, right? I mean, variation and the fact that things end is actually a crucial aspect of them having value in the first place.
Yeah, I just assume that. Unfortunately, part of the calculus that I feel happens with television is there's like a show comes out, whether it's a pilot or a season, and there's a sort of trajectory to tell the best story that they can. Then as it sort of takes off, as a show like this did,
then there are new incentives that emerge.
Maybe that, like, is this a 2-season show if it's doing okay and tells a contained story? Or are they now so certain of their market demographics that it's now a 5-season thing? And
I don't think so. I think
I'll be interested to see.
I think it's 3 or 4. Yeah.
I feel like 4 might be the new 5 after Succession kind of like carved out that zone. But it does always make you, when you are trying to unearth like whatever the organic mystery of this place is, one of the downsides to television, I think, is that with the amount of time that needs to be filled to meet the requirements of making all the money off of this idea, that you do sort of assume like, oh yeah, we're going to eventually get to like the resurrection of the guy. It's going to have to be this like, kind of like taking the Breaking Bad example, right? Where like he didn't start in a multinational drug ring, right?
Yeah. No.
But now that you've seen all of these prestige shows, the ones that hit play out and get stretched out, that like, I wonder if, how much of this, I would be fascinated to learn how much of what ends up being the ending was the original thought for the end. And that's not meant to be a criticism. It's just, it gives you a different set of things to like think about with a mystery like this, where it's more like, I wonder where they can go with it.
I think Ben Stiller in his interviews has said that the show has a firm ending and all the actors know what that ending is.
Yeah. And was that it before the show even started?
He certainly said it before season 2 started airing.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
And I think Apple, because they're so rich and this TV thing is tertiary at best to their main profit margin. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's much more
their main running of the world.
Right. I think it's much more about the whole, it's about cultural prestige, right? Yeah, much in the way Carnegie used to build libraries or whatever. Apple,
I mean, it is maybe an episode. We can wait for season 2's episode, but like, it is the chef's kiss that it's Apple making the show.
Oh yeah.
About this.
Yep. No, it's very so good. But great show. I've really been enjoying season 2. Maybe we'll talk about that again once the season's finished. So let some time pass, of course. And this is actually the 1-year anniversary of us doing the show.
Yeah,
just kind of interesting.
Congratulations to us, and thanks to everybody. The numbers are humble but mighty, and they're increasing all the time, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. We're getting out there around the world. We've got listeners on all major continents, which is exciting.
And so if you're on a minor continent, come on, join the party.
The Indian subcontinent. Haven't had any. We've had like a dozen or so Indian listeners. None in a while though.
Yeah.
So if you have a friend in India who you think would like the show, please send them our way. But
do like review. It actually does help.
It really helps.
I do this all the time.
We got a new review recently for the first time in a while, and I was thrilled to see it. It was enthusiastic and funny.
And it was like very good podcast or something like that, right?
Yeah. This is the end of my search for a good end of the world. This is the end of my search for a good podcast.
Oh yeah, it was clever too, right? No, that was great. If you're listening, it is a good feeling. So please, subscribe, follow on Instagram helps. We do post more there now.
On the end of the world, WMC.
WMS.
Wait, WMS. Do I know my own name? I'm starting to spell Stewart with a C. Stu. C.
It's Stewart with a C.
But next week we're going to be talking about the scene dividing comedy smash.
We think we are. Let's just quickly say, so we are, exciting news, planning and hoping to have our first ever guest on the episode, which will be comedian Maggie Crane.
The brilliant, multi-talented Maggie Crane.
The brilliant, multi-talented, right. Multi-hyphenate, whole deal. But it does require that we try to
we got to figure out some logistics stuff, but hopefully that'll figure out
some logistics. But you can safely assume that one hell of an effort will be made, and we're hoping. And if we do, we are going to be doing, like you said, the scene dividing comedy classic?
Question mark?
Bo
Burnham, Inside.
The King Lear of COVID.
That's right. That is, it is our greatest Lear.
So if you are listening and want to respond, feel free to go to Instagram and let us know, what do you think the King Lears of COVID have been so far? And if not, Inside.
Or you can also, if you're listening on Spotify, you can just leave a comment in the episode.
Sure,
gotten a few of those. Those are always fun, especially the haters.
I mean, maybe the King Lear of COVID's still been rejected by 115 publishing houses so far.
Certainly would be my experience if I had written anything worthwhile, I'm sure.
There's our King Lear, and we will be talking about that next week, actually.
That's right.
Tie that into this.
So until then, this has been The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu with a C. And we'll talk to you real soon.